Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, a warm welcome from me and Professor Baranchuk. My name is Vasilis Vasilikos, and I'm a professor of cardiology at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in Greece. And I'm the current president of ISNE, the International Society for Holter and Non-Invasive Electrocardiology. On my left is Professor Adrian Baranchuk, who is a professor of cardiology in Canada, and he is the president-elect of ISNE. This is the first webinar of our society, and we would like to send a warm welcome to everybody all over the world. Good morning in the States, good afternoon in Europe, good evening in Asia. We have an excellent list of panelists and speakers, and the title of today's presentation concerns the use of AI by the physicians in everyday practice, and how do the physicians and the patients what kind of impact AI and the modern technology has in their and in our life. So I would like to present our panelists. We have Professor Rod Passman from Chicago, United States, and Professor Manlio Marquez from Mexico. And the speakers are Professor Neeraj Varma from Cleveland Clinic from the USA, Professor Samuel Johnson from Iowa, USA, and Dr. Konstantinos Bakoyannis, who is a reader in our university in Thessaloniki, Greece. The word to you, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Vasilius. First of all, welcome to everybody all around the world. And on behalf of the board of directors of ISNE, we want to thank Vasilius Vasilikas, our president, for his dedication to this society, for the time invested to make this first webinar a reality. And we hope this is just the first one of a large series of educational platforms that ISNE is creating under your guidance. So thank you very much, Vasilius, for giving us all the opportunity to keep discussing electrocardiology at the highest level. I welcome our speakers. I welcome our panelists. We are super happy to be here. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Actually, I'm not a very tech guy, so I had to use technology, not because of my work only, but with my kids and to understand what my kids are doing. And also, everybody knows that during COVID, it was obligatory to use the modern technology. And I'm sure that modern technology made our life easier. But there are quite a lot of concern if we gain time, we have more free time, or we are slaves of this technology. Also, our community as electrophysiologists like recordings. And in the older period of time, the Holter monitor was a big thing. Then the wearables, the implantable devices were there, and then the wearables. I'm sure everybody has a very nice smartwatch, as I do, and enjoy their free time playing with it. Also, the patients do enjoy that, but I'm a little bit concerned if they enjoy at the end, and if we are enjoying the responses all the time. So I would like to call Professor Neeraj Varma from Cleveland Clinic, who is going to give us his talk, The New Era of Monitoring with Wearables versus Implantable Loop Monitors, and Redefining Arrhythmia Monitoring in the Digital Age. Neeraj.
Thank you, Professor Vasilikos, Professor Baranchuk, for the introduction, and it's an honor to be part of this first webinar. And you put it very nicely that we've moved on from prescribed devices like Holters to monitoring non-prescribed devices with wearables. And this is already beginning to impact our medical space. My slides need to be projected. Thank you. So I'm Neeraj Verma. I work in Cleveland, and good morning from Cleveland. So we've witnessed this transition, Holter, event recorders, MCOT, and patches, and for continuous monitoring, implantable loop recorders. And this is really for arrhythmia monitoring. And this was covered in the 2017 ISHNI statement. And that's only a matter of 7 years ago. But much has happened since then, and now we use phones and watches ubiquitously. These are not prescribed devices, and data can be retrieved at any time. This has significant applications for monitoring on a long-term basis, on an indefinite basis, for screening populations. And this has really been applied for atrial fibrillation. And there's a large amount of data for atrial fibrillation. We found out that we can screen at-risk populations and perhaps improve their outcomes by early detection of atrial fibrillation. One of our panelists, Professor Passman, is running a trial on administering anticoagulation on the basis of point-of-care assessment of atrial fibrillation. So we're really changing the paradigm of therapy. Much work done in atrial fibrillation on the basis of single-lead electrocardiograms recorded from wearable devices. But I want to change to the future, so something else that needs to be developed, and that is application in heart failure. Heart failure, of course, is a major concern. It is very expensive to treat for healthcare systems. Patients are treated late. They are often at high risk. So this is a problem. And each heart failure hospitalization, this dip here, is associated with poorer prognosis. So this is a serious condition. And patients, even when they're treated, never come back to baseline. And the more decompensations they have, the poorer their prognosis. So can we impact this with modern technologies? We have to presumably assess hemodynamics in order to anticipate and perhaps prevent these heart failure decompensations. And that really is a promise. And this has been investigated for almost 20 years. And this was a complicated device. This was a left atrial pressure sensor implanted on the right atrial side of the septum with left atrial recordings. And this reported left atrial pressure here, high and low on the right. And what was found was that hemodynamic changes nearly always preceded clinical decompensation. So this was an important signal. So that gives a target for preemptive therapy. And that hemodynamic monitoring could be performed by the patient on the basis of information that was being transmitted via the device. So hence, physician-directed patient self-management of left atrial pressure in heart failure patients. And this is really a condition that we're still trying to reach, a management paradigm that we're still trying to reach. And this started almost 20 years ago. The advance on this was a randomized trial, and this was the implantable pressure sensor, the pulmonary artery pressure sensor, CardioMEMS. And in a randomized trial, therapy that was adjudicated by direct pressure monitoring was associated with much better survival. So this is an implantable device, not a therapeutic device. So action taken on remote monitored data of hemodynamics improved outcomes. This led to the principle of monitoring of an actionable signal, something that you can act on, leading to an interventional therapy to change that signal back to baseline would improve outcomes. This was better than standard of care, standard of heart failure care in skilled medical centers. So a very important signal here. Nevertheless, this requires an invasive procedure and a lot of work regarding collecting data from the clinic's point of view and transmitting data from the patient's point of view. Do we need direct hemodynamic monitoring? That's another question. So this was examined in the world of implantable devices, pacemakers, and ICDs. These have the advantage of continuous monitoring without patient or clinic adjudication, or I should say operation in the transmission process, adjudication on the basis of filtered data here. So does implantable remote monitoring data give us sufficient information to act on this? And here we see, this slide is somewhat distorted, unfortunately, but we see a hemodynamic, we see a transmission profile of atrial fibrillation, ventricular rates, and patient activity. And these start to change 3 months before acute decompensated heart failure. So the promise is that if we acted 3 months before, would we prevent heart failure admissions and improve patient survival? So that slide is unfortunately hidden here, but the InTime trial showed a survival benefit on the basis of these data without a direct hemodynamic monitor. So this is very promising. But this requires collection and analysis of a lot of data. It cannot be done manually. So there's a lot of interest in using machine learning to provide an alert algorithm that can inform of action to be taken for a patient anticipated to have heart failure. All the major manufacturers of these implantable devices have created these algorithms, and one system has earned FDA clearance, and this is independent of all the independent manufacturers of implantable devices. So this is a unique platform. And we can be sensitive and timely in terms of predicting impending heart failure decompensation. Very important. Those are all implantable devices. And as within the management of atrial fibrillation for heart failure, can we use wearables? Can we use wearables to predict heart failure? So these are patch devices. And initially, this is the LINK-HF study from Sweden showing that anticipated heart failure hospitalization 1 week before clinical manifestations with high sensitivity and high specificity. This year, this BMAD study was published. This is a patch that detects surface impedance. And this showed that heart failure hospitalizations could be reduced and incidence of readmissions, ER visits, and death could be reduced by using these data. So no direct hemodynamic monitoring. These are surrogate markers, and yet we can impact heart failure admissions. At the American Heart Association meeting this last Saturday, the CardioSense system was presented. And this incorporates a seismocardiogram, body vibrations induced by the heart, an electrocardiogram, and a PPG to assess volumetric variations of blood circulation using infrared light signals. This is a patch that can be applied. It was granted FDA breakthrough device designation to non-invasively measure pulmonary capillary wedge pressure. Non-invasively. The first slide I started off with showed an invasive approach to it, a very skilled procedure. Here, a patch can produce the same thing and produce the same data in advanced heart failure patients. And in the seismic HF trial that was presented at the AHA, this device was within 1 millimeter of simultaneously measured pulmonary capillary wedge pressure measurements invasively. So a remarkable achievement for non-invasive monitoring of hemodynamics. There are a variety of wearable parameters that can be measured far beyond hemodynamics now. I'm just going to give 2 examples here. Remote speech analysis in the evaluation of heart failure here. So analyzing signals in the speech which might change in response to laryngeal edema or pulmonary edema associated with heart failure, very promising results. Here we have a sweat sensor which will track various changes in heart failure related electrolytes, even drug concentrations. So these can be tracked with a patch sensor that is simply monitoring sweat ingredients. of significant potential in heart failure management, published recently in Nature Electronics. What about the future? So these are all very exciting developments, but there are many false positives in here. And if we go back to, say, loop monitors, and this is for ECG analysis, the analytics required to reduce false positives cannot be implanted in the device or in a wearable. This has to be conducted in the remote monitoring platform. And here we tested one such system, and we found a very, very strong ROC curve here, area under the curve of more than 0.9, so high sensitivity and high specificity when you embed machine learning algorithms on the remote monitoring platform before presenting to the medical staff. So this reduces burnout from the medical staff and really concentrates their attention on meaningful, actionable data. But data management is a concern from the user, who can transmit at any time, multiple times. Data have to be ingested onto a platform, filtered, perhaps by AI, displayed on an electronic medical record, and then available for clinical review. So this is very, very important, so that only meaningful data come for review. And then one can act on those data, or perhaps those data can be relayed back to the user. So a different form of management in EP, where the patient is in the loop and managing the data himself and acting on the data himself. This exists in the world of continuous glucose monitoring, and we've been reluctant in electrophysiology, but perhaps this is the future. But there are drawbacks too, because adherence to this is not always assured. And here we see in the world of implantables, again, the relationship between level of adherence and survival in pacemaker and defibrillator patients. High adherence, very good survival; lower adherence, poorer survival, probably pointing to lifestyle conditions too. And identification of and troubleshooting disconnected patients takes a lot of time and work from the clinic. And the reasons may be patient or technology or clinic factors. So there are many promises and also perils associated with consumer technologies, with wearable technologies. Inconsistent regulatory oversight, need for validation standards, cybersecurity risks, and also we don't pay attention to unintended psychological consequences. And this was published recently, how wearable devices can actually cause anxiety in some patients, again in the atrial fibrillation world. This was published last month, and National Geographic picked this up. So this is really extending into the public domain, outside the medical domain, that wearable fitness trackers could make patients anxious when they follow up on their data without understanding. So really we have to be cognizant of this. So I think the wearables open up a huge opportunity. It has to be carefully channeled, and we'll hear about the mechanisms we can do that with subsequent speakers. But we can manage education, diagnostics, disease management, decision support, medication adherence, symptoms and environmental data collection. So formulate clinical research and assess lifestyle modification or implement lifestyle modification, things that have not been available in traditional prescribed monitoring devices. So a very exciting new world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neeraj. And we have we will have the opportunity to ask questions to Dr. Varma, both in the chat and from our panelists at the end of the last presentation. So please stay, as we will have lots of questions for Dr. Varma. Our next speaker is Dr. Samuel Johnson, an electrophysiologist from the University of Iowa and a very active member of ISHNI. So thank you very much, Sam, for agreeing to present today in our first webinar. It is a true pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Professor Baranchuk. Good day, everyone. My name is Sam Johnston, and I'm a cardiac electrophysiologist at the University of Iowa. I'm going to be speaking over the next 10 minutes or so about managing digital health and EP practices with an emphasis on incorporating artificial intelligence or machine learning into the practice. I have no disclosures, and I apologize if it seems that I highlight certain companies or products over others. I don't intend to favor one vendor over another, but of course I have more to say about products that I've experienced. There are a lot of AI companies working in the cardiology and EP space, and the landscape is changing very rapidly. So please keep that in mind, and that the examples I'm showing you are far from comprehensive. The practice of clinical cardiac electrophysiology is inherently dependent on modern technology. Most EPs have access to a personal computer and to a smartphone. Within the wealthiest countries, access to an electronic medical record is also now common. And AI-based applications will become increasingly available because they're software-based and they can be run on our personal computers and on our smartphones. But let's step back and ask ourselves first whether or not we want to incorporate AI into our practices. When technology helps us solve problems or increases efficiency or somehow improves people's lives, that's great. But technology isn't always so helpful. Over the past 20 to 30 years, we've all heard that electronic medical records are going to improve our practices. In a lot of ways, electronic medical records have arguably decreased our efficiency, increased our stress, contributed to physician burnout and early retirement. So when we consider how to incorporate more technology into our practices, this time in the form of various artificial intelligence applications, we need to think about it carefully. But I think that we're at an inflection point, and I believe that AI is going to be transformative in our practices, maybe not this year, but it will soon. Now let's look at some of the AI applications that we can potentially integrate into our EP practices. AI has been generating a lot of buzz in clinical medicine especially over the past 8 to 10 years, and we're beginning to see the fruits of that research become available in the clinical realm. So let's talk about what's possible now and where things are headed. AI is having big impact on ECG interpretation. AI is being used in Holter monitor interpretation. It's being used with cardiac implantable electronic device management, and especially with remote monitoring analysis. It's now being used not just with 3D mapping, but to create electroanatomic modeling. It's used for chart review. It's used for writing progress notes. It can be used for patient education and addressing patient inquiries. And ultimately, it will probably be involved in helping us establish the diagnosis and then managing our patient. So AI-based ECG interpretation has been an active area of research, and ECGs can be interpreted using convolutional neural networks, which are a form of deep learning. And so the ECG can be analyzed with AI, and one can use the AI to identify and to predict diseases that even an experienced electrophysiologist cannot see in the ECG. So it's picking up subtle findings. It can identify patients with low ejection fraction or patients who are likely to develop a low ejection fraction before it even happens. It can pick up pulmonary hypertension. It can detect atrial fibrillation before it happens, or suggest that it has occurred in patients that are in sinus rhythm. It can pick up hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, subtle forms of long QT syndrome, Brugada syndrome, and so forth. That can also identify patient's age and sex and so forth. But there are a number of limitations, and although these studies often involve over 100,000 patients, 100,000 ECGs each, there are still a lack of validation because there's such a thing as data drift, and applying these technologies in one hospital doesn't necessarily work in another hospital or in another setting or in another patient population. So there's limited FDA approval of this. And although if you search the internet, you can find a lot of vendors that are selling this or claim to be selling it, there are only a few examples that I'm aware of that have been cleared by the FDA. And the FDA clearance is something less than an FDA approval, incidentally. There's a company called Anumana that is in partnership with Mayo Clinic that has a smartphone-based application called ECG AI LEF, which you can use to look at an ECG and identify a patient with a low ejection fraction. Patients also can use the KardiaMobile, which is an application made by AliveCor, which is patient-facing data, and it analyzes the rhythm using AI and presents that to the patient. And of course, smartwatches like Apple and Samsung and others also present the patient-facing data to us. AI has been used by the large Holter companies for several years now to read their reports. So, for example, when a patient wears a patch monitor and has, say, 100,000 heartbeats every day, then after 7 days or 14 days or whatever, the monitor is mailed back to the company, and they use AI software to analyze it and give you a report, which is frankly very good compared to even without a human overreader. But of course, to this day, humans are still overreading what the computer is giving us. This is an example from iRhythm, and all of this information here has been comes from AI, with the exception of this little box in the lower right-hand corner, which is simply a physician saying, "I agree with all of that." So this is something that's probably already affecting your practice, and it is very useful. The management of devices is also changing. We see that there are some companies that are entering the market in the last few years that are offering AI services, and they can automate some of the process and interpret device interrogations, and can potentially be helpful in remote monitoring. They can, in some instances, can even suggest programming to you. So some examples of these are Octagos Health and Merge. That's MURJ. I haven't used either one of them, but I know of a hospital that is just starting to use one of them, and they believe it's promising. There are some companies that are involved with using AI in creating electroanatomic models, and this is to assist with image-guided ablation. So the electrophysiologist obtains a CT or a cardiac MRI on their patient, for instance, before a VT ablation, and that data is sent to the company. In this case, InHeart, which was a company that was described in Heart Rhythm not long ago. And the company processes this data and then sends it back within 24 hours or so, and highlights substrate and channels within the heart just based on the imaging data. And that can be uploaded into the mapping software that you use, any of the regular ones, Carto, Emsight, Rhythmia, or whatever. And this can potentially be time-saving or improve outcomes according to the company. Although I have no experience with it, this is something, this sort of technology is something to keep a lookout for. AI-based chart reviews there are many examples of this, and they're out there to help us sort through enormous patient charts. So this could potentially be useful. I have some experience with this, and I've been pleasantly surprised that these things can summarize the medical chart and bring in multiple different sources. So they can look at all the media files that are potentially cluttered, giving, and not necessarily well organized in the patient's chart, but they can also pull in outside medical records. And you can adjust the features on these to be specialty specific. So you could say, I'm a cardiologist. In my experience, you cannot set it to be an electrophysiologist, but setting it as a cardiologist is pretty effective. And so some examples of the companies doing this are Evidently, Abstractive Health, Autonomize AI, HealthKey, Notable, and Wellsheet. These can be used with your within your electronic medical record like Epic or Cerner or so forth. This is an example from Evidently from one of my patients. It's anonymized, but it's one of my patients in Epic. And so it looked at a number of different charts, and this is just one page of what it came up for with me. And it takes about maybe 3 or 4 minutes to analyze a large chart and give you summaries. They can also be used for progress note writing. So using natural language processing or NLP, it can act as a scribe. So it can be specialty specific and write your progress note. Some examples of this, companies that do this and are incorporated into your electronic medical record, again, such as Cerner or Epic, are software called Nabla, Tally AI, and DeepScribe. So I've been impressed with trying this. One of these companies I've used, and I saw a patient, for instance, in clinic, and he sort of went off onto a tangent about which dress shirts he likes to wear and what dress shirt was I wearing and so forth. And later in the conversation, he started to tell me about potato chips and which brands he likes. And at the end of all of this, I thought my note that was being transcribed was going to be largely irrelevant. But in fact, it did not mention dress shirts at all. And the only mention of potato chips was that the patient occasionally consumed them and had some minor ankle swelling when he did. So I was impressed with a concise note that was frankly pretty well written and useful. AI can be used for patient education. It can potentially create personalized materials for the patient. It's good at language translation. Interestingly, it tends to struggle with German sometimes. And chatbots can be used to answer patient questions. If you have a large language model developed, then you can have it use material that you believe is reliable to answer your patient's questions. And surprisingly, patients, when they're blinded to the source of information, have, at least in one study, found that the computer shows more empathy than the physician. So anyway, that's interesting. Last, AI-based diagnosis and management is something that's probably going to be the next frontier. This would be something beyond decision rules and risk calculators. In this instance, AI would probably analyze the chart and compare the medical literature and or practice guidelines with the patient's information, possibly use Bayesian logic and come up with a differential diagnosis with different probabilities of those diagnoses, and then propose a workup, including which labs or other tests to order, and possibly suggest treatments and maybe provide some sort of prognosis. But this is not something that's commercially available now, at least within the cardiology or EP space. So finally, we see AI is beginning to affect and impact healthcare. It's still in the formative stages, but it's growing very rapidly. And it's already being applied to our EP patients, such as our patients who are using smartwatches and the Holters that analyses that we're receiving from the major companies, the major vendors. So there are potentially a lot of useful applications, but there are still a lot of caveats. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Excellent talk. And you throw us in the deep waters, what we have to do, with all this technology. And I'm sure at the end, we're going to find the right way to survive. So I would love to continue. We're going to have the questions at the end. Thank you very much. And I would like to introduce the third speaker, who is Dr. Konstantinos Bakoyannis, who is working with us in the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. And he's going to talk about the patient, the literacy in artificial intelligence, and how the patients and the providers can share their knowledge and how they can live together. Konstantinos.
Dear Professor Vassilikos, dear colleagues, I want to thank you for this invitation to present and discuss a topic which I think is of growing importance for us today in healthcare. So to begin, although some of these definitions were covered in the previous talks, it's important to state that digital health, where it is this field that tries to combine and use digital technologies and improve our ability, our efficiency to deliver healthcare and make medicine more personalized and precise. And at the same time, it is important to know that artificial intelligence is defined as the simulation of human intelligence. And actually, it's this field of science, and speaking about health and digital health, it's this field that will help us and support us to solve problems, reasoning, learning, educating, and understanding a lot of concepts. When discussing AI literacy, I think that it's important to keep in mind the transition that we lived the last years, the more than 20 years, from the disease-centered care to the patient-centered care. That's very important also to remember which are the core elements for when discussing patient-centered care. And briefly, I will share with you the 5 core elements, which are the therapeutic alliance, the doctor as a person and the patient as a person, the shared power and responsibility, but also the biopsychosocial perspective, which means that we see each other, I mean the healthcare providers as well as the patients and their caregivers as whole person. We should also understand that the convergence of artificial intelligence and healthcare reshapes in the way that we approach diagnosis, treatment, and in general patient care. But we should also understand that I think it is a common discussion a lot of time among us is that as this revolution unfolds, there is this critical challenge that we should address. How do we ensure that both patients and healthcare professionals are equipped and understand these technologies? it is clear that AI and this term that we use, AI-enabled healthcare, can help a lot and support a lot of aspects in healthcare, both for the patients and the healthcare providers. You can see in these two circles, there are some aspects that AI can further help and support. So like to enhance the diagnostic accuracy, the personalized treatment plans, and of course, as we shared also from the previous speakers, to enhance our tools for diagnosis, to educate both healthcare professionals and patients, and of course, it can help us to streamline administrative workflows. However, and that is, I think, the core of the term AI literacy. We should understand that when speaking about AI literacy, it is not only about understanding how AI works, but it's also about knowing how AI could impact or impacts healthcare decisions, privacy, and of course, outcomes. So the challenge that I see is that how we can create and how we can build this shared understanding in order that artificial intelligence could become a bridge between these groups and not a barrier, not two worlds that collide. Just to state some of the challenges that has to do with the AI literacy for patients, we could include the complex concept that is quite difficult even for a lot of scientists to understand and implement. Of course, the privacy concerns and the limited digital literacy. What also is also very important that in many cases we have some unrealistic expectations from AI. But also, what we could also discuss and see is the loss of human touch. And for the healthcare professional, I think that some of the challenges is, of course, the trust and the accountability, the ethical and legal issues, and also taking into account the resources and the time constraints that we have in our daily clinical life, how we can integrate these tools in our workflow, and how we can continue educate ourselves or be more professional in this way. So you can see in one of these studies, and I should state here that one of the interesting parts preparing for this presentation was that I was motivated to study articles that I don't do in my normal life. I mean, they are more in this social, psychological, and ethical aspect of AI. You can see in this study coming from Florida, which is an exploratory questionnaire-based survey data from 600 US adults. You can see that the adults responded that they can use, they are eager to use AI in their daily, in their healthcare delivery, but primarily in tasks not related with doctor-patient relationship. That is what I previously told, that is the fear of losing the human touch. What is also very interesting, and we should keep in mind, it is that they were more comfortable with AI, or they feel more comfortable in the case that they were also involved in the decision making or in the development and implementation of such tools in their daily life. This is also highlighted by this very small study, actually, that included 30 patients, which also suggests and gives a very rough framework on how to do that, suggests to enable patient-centered AI application in the development, what we call in many cases in digital health, the co-creation of the tools and the co-decision on how to use them. So how we can bridge this AI literacy gap? I think that there are it's quite common, or you can hear that as a quite common, but they are very important to keep in mind. Of course, we should focus and create patient-centric educational material, which should be simple and should be in a way that they should guide the patient to understand what is AI and how they can use it, and how they can implement in their daily life. Of course, this is linked to the tailor-made AI literacy program, because as you can understand, as a clinician, you have to deal with a lot of people and a lot of patients that they are at different levels, educational level and social level, and you should keep that in mind. Of course, for the healthcare professional, it's very important to integrate both digital health and AI education in continuous medical training. To my knowledge, there are limited universities and medical schools around the world that they have separate in their curriculum lessons regarding the education of the medical students on digital health. And of course, it is quite easy, and we should try to do it and utilize these digital health tools and have hands-on experience in order to be better educated. Of course, for these strategies and in order to implement such actions, it's very important to collaborate with various stakeholders. And of course, we should be sure and will be advocates for ethical practices. You can see here, this is a meta-analysis that is recently published in the NPJ Digital Medicine, and has identified that as a key barriers for the healthcare professionals to implement digital health tools in their daily clinical routine, the infrastructure and technical issues. Of course, the psychological barriers. It is very difficult to leave your comfort zone, and of course, workload related concerns. Of course, it is also indicated that key facilitators may be the training and education, the active engagement, and of course, the incentives to use and implement such tools. There are also suggested specific frameworks on how to use AI, and especially conversational or generative AI, in order to create tailor-made education for specific groups, either for patients or for healthcare professionals. That is also very recent articles. There are a lot of articles working on this or suggesting such frameworks. But as we say, and when dealing with ChatGPT or relevant chatbots, I think that it's very important to keep in mind the challenges that we have to face, the challenges that are inherent to AI use and implementation in daily clinical life. And that is, of course, the data. The data quality and data harmonization remains one of the key challenges in order to have qualitative and quality results from chatbots and AI tools. There are a lot of efforts. You can see here the FHIR or the OHDSI. There are organizations that promote and educate professionals in data harmonization, and they are trying to implement frameworks. And recently we have in Europe the Open Health Data Space, which gives also some guidance on how to manage your data and to create databases based on quality data. Of course, we should not forget the AI hallucination. This is a term that we use in the case that artificial intelligence tools gives wrong results. And there is the explainable AI and an emerging field of artificial intelligence that gives us some explanation why AI tool came to this result. Of course, there is a lack, and that is one of the gaps, I think, and one of the challenges. There is a lack of evaluation framework, that we say health technology assessment frameworks, in order to know how we can assess the quality of the AI tool, the clinical effectiveness, or in general, the efficacy and the effectiveness. And of course, we should not forget speaking about and thinking in a global way, there are also inequalities in technological maturity around the world. In our department, we are trying actually the last 3 years now with the cardio school. We are trying to create a curriculum and support our patients in order to improve their health literacy and digital literacy. These are the photos from one of the hands-on digital literacy workshop that we run. And while what we've learned the last years, it is that this kind of seminars work, but you should be very creative in order to motivate the people to use and understand digital health technologies and, of course, AI technologies. To sum up, and the key messages from this presentation is actually that AI literacy is a shared responsibility. Of course, ongoing education is essential, and privacy and security are foundational. AI enhances collaboration and does not replace healthcare providers. And as in any innovation, I think that the motto should be start small and think big, but all this should be based on ethics, trust, and collaboration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kostas. Excellent talk. And I would like to invite our panelists, Professor Passman and Professor Marquez, and also my co-chair, Professor Baranchuk, and our distinguished speakers. So let's start with Professor Marquez. What's your opinion, Manuel?
Hello, good morning. First of all, congratulations to all our great speakers. Very nice presentations and very useful, I think, for not only for all of us, but our and all that are watching us on YouTube. So I will have some comments and questions. For example, for Niraj, what do you think it will be the role nowadays of the implantable loop recorders when we have all these wearable devices that are developing so fast, as you mentioned?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. It's really been answered it's not been answered, it's being developed in the arrhythmia space. My talk was really on heart failure, where implantable loop recorders are being repurposed, and there's trials undergoing this now, to use them for heart failure monitoring. But in the world of arrhythmia monitoring, or standard indications for, say, a Holter, understand palpitations, understand syncope. We've used implantable loop recorders when those symptoms are infrequent and when we want to quantify, because it does provide continuous monitoring. The implantable provides continuous monitoring. In comparison, watches, rings, phones provide discontinuous monitoring. So it may not provide, or it may not detect asymptomatic conditions. So there is a trade-off there. ILRs are expensive and they're invasive, whereas watches and rings are relatively less expensive. So there are trade-offs here. I think it really depends on the populations that are being screened, or patient. I won't even say patients. I'll say consumers who are screening themselves. So it also depends on that. So in the crossover area, I think watches and wearables have made a significant space. If we look at, say, the Stroke Stop study, we can't put implantable loop recorders in 20,000 patients who have no prior history of any condition and no symptoms in order to detect a condition like atrial fibrillation. The wearables have a significant opportunity there. And there has been a signal that information and arrhythmias detected from screening there can lead to therapies which will improve survival. So that is simply not practical with implantables. So A long-winded answer, but I think these are very different spaces.
Thank you, Niraj. Maybe Rod has a question.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for these excellent talks. I have a question. We have all this amazing technology, and there are literally tens of millions of these devices out there. Yet the major barriers to including this in routine care is that, at least in the United States, there's no easy way to get this into the EHR, and there's no way to bill for it. So it may take time to read an ECG, go into the patient's chart, figuring out what to do with it. So my question is, what's the standard? Do we need to show that using this technology keeps people out of the hospital, saves lives, improves outcomes? Or is this a diagnostic test that we use as we would an EKG or a medical grade monitor? And what are the barriers to sort of viewing this in a similar manner as a loop recorder in terms of integration into the EHR and our ability to appropriately monetize it? I'll take a response from anyone. Sam, you're muted.
Yes. Well, I think we all struggle with this issue, Dr. Passman. Personally, I think that our clinic benefits from this because we see a lot of patients earlier than we would have seen, simply because their smartwatch alerted them to something and they came into clinic and we see them. So I think it does, it generates clinic, patient visits, and probably many of them are justified. In terms of what to do when the patient, especially an obsessive patient, wants to send you or share with you a PDF a couple of times a day, then that's harder to deal with. But my personal approach is that I ask them to bring those to their clinic appointment for my review, and outside of that, I tend not to review them. I tell them that if they're not feeling well or if they have a great concern, then they should go to the emergency department. Otherwise, we review it in clinic together. That's not a perfect solution, but sort of what I've been doing.
Thank you. The same questions arose when we began with remote monitoring of implantable devices. It's 20 years ago, and we don't have all the answers yet, but that's still an issue. How do you
We do have a question from the chat. Let's see. So this is Dr. Garcia Pereira. Hello, good morning here in Brazil. My name is Fabio. I'm an electrophysiologist, but there is no question. Can we see if there is a question?
No, actually,
Very well, Fabio.
I'm following the chat. There is no question, actually.
So, Niraj, if I could just follow up with your statement, I agree with you that we generated that data showing that remote monitoring, improves lives and keeps people out of the hospital. So, do we need to now prove that same thing using digital health technologies, or do we say, hey, every patch monitor that we have, we don't have data to show that keeps people out of the hospital, right? But it makes sense, and we use it because it's maybe replaces some other technology. So, where's the bar before we start sort of incorporating this as a test that we'd recommend to patients?
Yeah, the factors that drive adoption are improved workflows and improved patient outcomes. And those are two hard endpoints. But they're hard to get. They're hard to realize. And often, as you say, we use many aids which don't have those kinds of outcomes associated with them. But they make our general lives easier, and we have a feel for that using for diagnostic purposes in patients. I think with wearables, technologies are changing within the day, so they're moving very rapidly. The amount of data that are coming in, and this has been addressed in the previous talks, are huge. There are enormous amounts of data, and we don't know how to sort the actionable data from the non-actionable. And there's the majority of those data are non-actionable. We learned that from ILRs, and it's the ILR implantables that really drove the development of third-party platforms, because hospitals could no longer manage those data. And ILR data is still relatively small in volume compared to wearable data.
But just to make a small note, I think always if you have a kind of information, it's a good thing, yeah, to start with. But then the problem arises when you have too much of this kind of information to see what is rubbish and what is clear. But I think it's a good thing to start. That's my personal opinion. We have a question from George Giannopoulos from Greece. What about liability issues? If an AI tool causes harm, who gets the blame? Very nice question, George. And, I'm very curious for the panel's voices.
Who wants to start?
I can start.
Okay, Konstantinos.
And actually, I would like to make a very short comment on the previous question because it's very interesting. Just a short comment, but that is also linked with this question. One of the key challenges that we now see it is that the most detailed HR systems were designed by software engineers and software experts, and the idea was the more the best. More information. That's why it's sometimes difficult to navigate in one of the EHR systems, for example, Epic in the US or even in other countries. So they are starting now to collaborate with physicians and doctors in order to find a way to make it easier and more user-friendly. And the second one, which is very closely linked to the question from Professor Giannopoulos, is that one of the key things that we don't have exact guidance now is the frameworks. There are a lot of guidance, both from the World Health Organization, EMA, FDI. They are giving some guidance, but there is no exact frameworks on how to assess the clinical effectiveness, the clinical efficacy, as well as the liability. One of the things that we say is that education plays a key role, and that is why in most of the guidelines from all societies we are discussing now about shared decision. Shared decision means that we should also address the responsibility if it is the shared. I don't agree that it's also shared, the responsibility, but we should discuss it, and that's very important. And we have examples of this. For example, we have the example of the insulin pumps and the new digital devices for diabetes treatment. There is also a guidance, there is an education, and there is also a clear responsibility in the cases of wrong decisions. Or this is the perception that we have about these tools, which are digital health tools. And to sum up, I think that if we've discussed this question 2 years or 3 years before, I will be much more optimistic and I will be much more hyped about that all will go. But now I think maybe that's because I'm getting older, I'm much more conservative. I think that we have a long distance to cover in order to implement and use all this data in a safe and secure way for the healthcare professional and the patients in our daily life.
I think I will keep from your last slide, start to do, and then, you're going to do big things. But I'm sure we're in a crossroad where, we have to go forward, whatever the implications or our fears are, because this is the new life, this is the new condition we are facing. We have to be very, very precise what kind of use we're going to use. But at the end of the day, I think everybody likes that you have, the diagnosis for your patient, or, if something comes up with your patient and you know that, relatively well. My concern, though, we have in the panel excellent speakers from the US, from Mexico, from Canada, from Greece. But what are the implications of this kind of technology, digital technology, in, I would dare to say, in the more developed countries and the less developed countries? How do you see that? I mean, or also in one, let's say, developed country, there are different areas where, people don't have the same kind of literacy. What do you think
Rod?
of this?
Well, I actually think this creates a fantastic opportunity, right? Because, for tens of dollars, you could buy a 6-lead device that you could use, tens of thousands of times, and essentially get an ECG on every patient who walks in to your clinic or even a rural area and get it sent to you. So I think this could be one of the great success stories. This could, the digital divide that we feared, this could be a great equalizer because this technology is inexpensive and far-reaching. So it creates an incredible opportunity to take even standard ECG monitoring in a more basic manner and bring it to very rural and otherwise medically underprivileged areas.
Yeah.
No, exactly. I agree with that completely, Rod. For instance, with implantable remote monitoring, that costs more. It commanded a premium price on implantable devices, which are already expensive and often unavailable in, say, third world countries. So very little uptake of remote monitoring in Asia, for instance, very little uptake. On the other hand, Asia has a huge penetration of wireless devices. Everybody is connected. And as Dr. Passman said, now you've got connected patients and you can empower them with a monitoring tool. So this reaches a huge population of people.
We have a few minutes only for answering the second question from the audience, from Dr. Pereira. How do you deal with increasing AI FOMO, fear of missing out?
What do you mean missing out? Missing out the technology?
So, FOMO is not following.
You're missing out data by AI and incurring in some sort of mistake because AI didn't detect something that is relevant for the decision making.
It could also be fear of missing out, that the physician has FOMO because he or she is not using AI and thinks that he should be. So that I think that could be the FOMO that arises as well.
In that sense, I concur with Sam's view. And the first question is, who is responsible for AI mistakes? I think that as doctors, we use a lot of AI for the last 40, 50 years. Every ECG we do as ISHNI members brings a report that was done with AI. And we do a reanalysis of what we see and we take full responsibility. So my answer to that is, if you use AI for whatever aspect of your decision making and you do a mistake, you are equally responsible than when you do a mistake without using AI.
Right. I think that the metaphor that Microsoft uses is appropriate. They call their online large language model AI tool Copilot. I think that these AI tools that we're using in healthcare are also analogous to that, or to that Copilot. And ultimately, the physician, though, you are the pilot, and you're responsible ultimately for the patient. And the Copilot can assist you, but ultimately, I think the liability will rest with the physician who makes the decision to use the AI or not. And I think that will also evolve because there are not a lot of legal case precedents, but the precedents will, I'm sure, occur quickly, and the laws will probably tell us more about where the liability will rest. Maybe some of it will rest with the company that develops the tool as well.
Gents, I would like, we are at the end of this first webinar, and I would like our president, sorry, Manlio, our president, Dr. Vasilikos, to say a few words to conclude this first webinar. And I truly hope that we can count on all of you for our second webinar, maybe early in 2025. Vasilios?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Adrian. I'm really excited for this first webinar of ISNE. And I think we start low and we're going to do big, Konstantinos, right? So thank you, everybody, the speakers, the panelists, and the technical support, and all of the listeners and the participants. You can enjoy later on this recorded seminar in our webpage. And I would like to invite to visit our webpage and join ISNE. We're a great society. We're a small family society, right, Adrian?
Yes, sir.
And we welcome all young investigators, doctors who are interested on this kind of developments. Also, I would like to take the opportunity to remind you that the next International Society, the International Congress on Electrocardiology, which is organized by ISNE and by the ICE, is going to take place in 2025 on the 30th of May until the 1st of June in Thessaloniki, Greece. And we all welcome you there with a physical presence. I think we're going to share great moments. Thank you very much, and take care, and see you on the next week. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.